They called it the golden age of Hollywood, but for black people, Asian actors, indigenous performers, and anyone who wasn't white, it was anything but golden. Behind the glamorous film reels and red carpets were stars who weren't just complicit in racism, they were loud, proud, and completely protected while being racist as hell. Some wore blackface, some played offensive stereotypes, some said straight up white supremacist things in interviews, and still got statues, awards, and studio deals like nothing ever happened. And even today, their names are engraved on Hollywood history. Their legacies are still praised. Some even have airports, statues, and theme parks named after them. But it's time we stop pretending it was all harmless nostalgia. These weren't just men of their time. They were extremely racist stars, and Hollywood let them be legends anyway. Let's break it all down. 15 extremely racist stars from old Hollywood and what they really thought about us. John Wayne wasn't just a movie star. He was the symbol of old Hollywood masculinity. From The Searchers to True Grit, he built an empire playing rugged, patriotic white heroes. And for decades, he was treated like an American icon. But John Wayne wasn't just acting out white dominance on screen. He believed in it off-screen too. In a 1971 Playboy interview, Wayne said, "I believe in white supremacy until the blacks are educated to a point of responsibility." Not a slip of the tongue, not a rumor. He said it proudly on the record in his own words. He doubled down by defending colonial violence against Native Americans, saying, "I don't feel we did wrong in taking this great country away from them. They were selfishly trying to keep it for themselves." This man didn't just represent America in the movies, he embodied the most dangerous myths about it. He also criticized civil rights protests, opposed women's rights, and mocked gay characters on screen as perverse. And yet, to this day, there's a John Wayne Airport in Orange County. His statue still stands. His name still gets honored. People like to say he was just a man of his time. But even in his time, his views were extreme. The civil rights movement was well underway, and Wayne was actively against it. He wasn't a passive product of racism. He was an active voice for it, and Hollywood kept giving him the mic. John Wayne didn't just wear the hat. He was the cowboy white supremacy rode in on. Walter Brennan is one of the most decorated actors in the classic Hollywood history. He won 3 Academy Awards, more than any other male supporting actor ever, and starred in beloved westerns like The Westerner, Rio Bravo, and The Guns of Will Sonnet. On screen, he played the lovable old-timer, the comic relief, the cranky but harmless grandpa figure. But off-screen, Brennan was one of the most openly racist actors in Hollywood. No rumor, no speculation. He said the quiet part loud. Brennan was a proud member of the John Birch Society, a far-right group that supported segregation, opposed the civil rights movement, and warned of a communist black uprising in America. When Martin Luther King Jr. was assassinated in 1968, crew members on set recalled Brennan cheering, laughing, and dancing when he heard the news. Let that sit for a second. America lost a civil rights hero, and one of Hollywood's most awarded actors celebrated it like a party. He also allegedly recorded a racist spoken word album titled Negroes in the Civil Rights Movement, packed with anti-black propaganda. On set, Brennan frequently used racial slurs and openly disrespected anyone who didn't share his white conservative values. He was known to call anyone left-leaning a communist and saw racial equality as a threat to American tradition. And yet, he kept working. Hollywood handed him awards, applause, legendary status. Because in old Hollywood, racism wasn't disqualifying, as long as you could hit your marks and charm the audience, Walter Brennan didn't just hold racist views, he weaponized them, and never once had to pay the price. And while Brennan was laughing at real-world violence, the next star made racism his entire act, and Hollywood called him a legend for it. Before there was sound in movies, there was Al Jolson, the star of The Jazz Singer, 1927. Jolson is often credited with ushering in the talkie era, a huge milestone in film history. But that moment, that so-called breakthrough, was built on blackface. In The Jazz Singer, Jolson plays a white man who becomes a famous performer by painting his face black and performing minstrel songs. His character literally sings about Mammy while imitating a caricature of blackness, and Hollywood called it revolutionary. That's not a footnote. That's how the entire sound era began, with racism baked into the soundtrack. Jolson made blackface his brand. He didn't do it once. he did it over and over. In film, in theater, in concerts. He popularized songs written in minstrel dialect and built his fame on mocking the very people he claimed to admire. Some defenders like to say, well, Jolson supported black performers. Sure, as long as he got to wear their identity like a costume first. He opened doors by holding the key himself and profiting off the stereotypes that locked others out. Al Jolson wasn't a footnote in Hollywood history, he was a cornerstone, the first major movie star to sing on screen, and he did it in blackface. They called him a pioneer, they gave him awards, they built statues, but the truth is, he didn't amplify black culture. He mocked it, packaged it, and sold it back to white audiences, and Hollywood made him a hero for it. David O. Selnik is remembered as one of the greatest producers of classic cinema. He brought us Gone with the Wind, a film that won 10 Oscars, broke box office records, and became a cornerstone of American film history. But let's be honest, Gone with the Wind was a beautiful lie. Selnik didn't just romanticize the Old South, he helped Hollywood rewrite history to make slavery look dignified, and the Confederacy seem noble. The black characters, reduced to stereotypes, loyal servants, simple-minded houseworkers, or background props. Even Hattie McDaniel, who made history as the first black Oscar winner, was praised not for her performance, but for playing a good mammy. And Selnik didn't stop with the film. He fought tooth and nail to keep the movie racially authentic, which meant white. He refused to hire black consultants for the script. He rejected attempts to show slavery's brutality, calling it unnecessary politics. And when civil rights groups protested the film's content, Selnik dismissed them as overreacting. Behind the scenes, he enforced segregation on set and avoided casting black actors in anything beyond servant roles. He even worked with Southern theater owners to make sure the film's release wouldn't offend white audiences. Selnik wasn't just a storyteller, he was a historical gatekeeper, and he used Hollywood to protect a false, whitewashed version of America. Gone with the Wind didn't erase slavery, it glorified it. And Selnik made sure the lie looked beautiful enough to win awards. But if Selnik rewrote the past, this next director made sure black actors never had a future in his films. Cecil B. DeMille was Hollywood royalty. The man behind the Ten Commandments, Samson and Delilah, and the King of Kings, he was known for epic stories, massive sets, and a flair for turning scripture into cinema. But while DeMille was preaching morality on screen, off-screen, he helped enforce one of Hollywood's most racist casting systems. DeMille was a vocal segregationist. He publicly supported keeping races separate, not just in society, but in his movies. On set, black actors were only allowed to appear as slaves, savages, or silent extras. Even in biblical films set in Africa or the Middle East, he consistently cast white actors in brownface and pushed black actors to the background, if they were allowed at all. And it wasn't just creative interpretation. DeMille actively lobbied against integration in the film industry. He pushed for studio policies that kept casting rooms and contract rosters overwhelmingly white. He opposed unions that supported civil rights reforms, and he regularly blacklisted actors and writers he saw as too progressive. In his later years, he became a key figure in the anti-communist movement in Hollywood, but for DeMille, communist often just meant pro-black, pro-integration, or anti-racist. He was hailed as a visionary, a moral compass, a godfather of epic filmmaking, but what he really built was a Hollywood that looked holy, while quietly shutting its gates to anyone who wasn't white. Because for Cecil B. DeMille, salvation was cinematic, but only if you came in the right color. Errol Flynn was Hollywood's golden bad boy, the swashbuckling star of Robin Hood, Captain Blood, and the Seahawk. He was charming, dangerous, and impossible to look away from. But while Hollywood sold him as the roguish heartthrob, behind the scenes, Flynn had a dark, disturbing relationship with fascism and racial superiority. Flynn wasn't just problematic, he was reportedly obsessed with Adolf Hitler. According to multiple biographers and FBI files, he openly admired Nazi Germany and even met with Nazi officials in the lead-up to World War II. A 1980 biography by Charles Hyam alleged that Flynn served as a spy for the Nazis, providing information about anti-fascist figures in Hollywood. While these claims were never conclusively proven, the FBI kept a file on Flynn's political leanings due to his open pro-German sympathies. He frequently made racist remarks, particularly about black and Jewish people. On set and in interviews, he was known for mocking civil rights efforts and referring to minorities with slurs. And just like others of his era, Flynn never paid for any of it. He was too bankable. too beautiful, too useful to the machine. Even when whispers about his Nazi ties started circulating, studios buried them. Instead of scandal, he got a second wave of fame, and his bad boy image became part of the brand. Flynn's legacy still shows up in pop culture tributes, vintage merch, and classic film retrospectives. But the truth is, he wasn't just a reckless womanizer or a wild child. Errol Flynn was a man who flirted with fascism, while Hollywood flirted with him. Bing Crosby's voice defined an era. He gave the world White Christmas, charmed generations with his velvet tone, and became one of the most successful entertainers in history. He won an Oscar, sold over 1 billion records, and shaped the entire sound of American popular music. But behind the microphone, Bing Crosby was not the man fans thought he was. According to his own son, Gary Crosby, the man who serenaded millions at Christmas was deeply racist in private. In Gary's memoir, he describes growing up in a house where his father routinely made racial jokes, targeting black people, Latinos, and Jews with cruel humor passed off as harmless fun. This wasn't just generational ignorance, it was a pattern, and it shaped the way Crosby raised his family and carried himself off stage. He also had ties to exclusive country clubs and elite circles that actively practiced racial exclusion. Yet his public image remained squeaky clean. He played priests, heroes, and lovable father figures, and nobody questioned the disconnect between his roles and his real-life views. And while contemporaries like John Wayne or Walter Brennan made their bigotry public, Crosby's brand was built on quiet racism behind a warm smile. The kind you couldn't quote, but you could feel if you were in the room. He wasn't loud about it, but he didn't have to be. Because in old Hollywood, racism didn't need a spotlight to thrive. It just needed silence. And Bing Crosby's silence spoke volumes. Gary Cooper was the face of decency. In High Noon, Sergeant York, and Mr. Deeds Goes to Town, he played noble, upright men who stood up for what was right, quiet heroes who didn't need to yell to make a point. But off-screen, Cooper wasn't defending justice. He was defending the status quo. Cooper held deeply anti-progressive views, both politically and personally. He was a staunch conservative who aligned himself with far-right organizations during the Red Scare and was one of the biggest celebrity backers of the House Un-American Activities Committee. He testified in support of the blacklist, accusing actors, writers, and filmmakers of being communists, not because he had proof, but because their values didn't align with his. And when it came to race, Cooper didn't hide his prejudice. He reportedly used anti-Semitic slurs in private conversations and spoke against civil rights movements during the 1950s and early 60s. He was associated with groups that supported segregation and surrounded himself with political allies who opposed integration in Hollywood and beyond. The most disturbing part, people still call him a symbol of American values. Because Hollywood didn't just reward clean faces, they rewarded the illusion of morality, even when the man behind it worked to silence progressive voices and uphold systemic racism. Gary Cooper stood tall on screen, but in real life, he stood in the way. James Stewart is often remembered as the moral center of classic Hollywood. With roles in It's a Wonderful Life, Mr. Smith Goes to Washington, and Rear Window, he became the everyman, the face of dignity, small-town values, and quiet courage. But James Stewart's wholesome image didn't match his private views, because behind the principled characters and patriotic speeches was a man who struggled deeply with race. Stewart grew up in a privileged, all-white environment in Pennsylvania, and despite his success and global fame, he never truly challenged the views he inherited. On the set of The Man Who Shot Liberty Valance, black actor Woody Strode accused Stewart of making racist remarks during filming, remarks so uncomfortable that director John Ford had to step in and defuse the situation. And that wasn't an isolated moment. In the 1970s, Stewart starred in The Jimmy Stewart Show, where he reportedly refused to work with a black co-star, allegedly demanding the role be recast because he didn't want a black man lecturing his character on television. His exact quote, according to insiders, "Blacks are bossing white people all over the country. I'm not letting it happen on my show." Stewart was also politically aligned with FBI Director J. Edgar Hoover, serving as a quiet informant during the Red Scare, helping expose leftist creatives under the guise of national loyalty. He's still remembered as the good guy, the voice of reason, the heart of American film. But the truth is, Stewart's screen roles were full of justice, while his real life stayed full of fear. W.C. Fields was one of Hollywood's earliest comedy stars, famous for his dry wit, bulbous nose, and boozy persona. He played cynical misanthropes who hated children, distrusted women, and loved a good drink. Audiences thought it was just an act. But the truth? W.C. Fields wasn't playing. Behind the scenes, Fields wasn't just a cranky comedian. He was a racist who made no effort to hide it. He frequently referred to black people as monkeys, refused to share scenes with non-white actors, and went out of his way to avoid anything that even hinted at integration. He once walked off a set because a black crew member tried to speak to him. He shouted slurs, demanded the man be removed, and told the director, "If I wanted to hear a jungle, I'd go to Africa." Let that sit for a second. And this wasn't just in private. His vaudeville routines often included blackface, caricatures of black dialects, and jokes about lynching. He mocked Chinese, Jewish, and indigenous people in equal measure, but his hatred for black people was personal. Even fellow racist comedians of the era considered him mean-spirited. Fields wasn't just offensive for laughs. He believed the things he said. But guess what? Hollywood still loved him. He headlined feature films, signed major contracts with Paramount, and became one of the first actors to get creative control over his own projects. Because in old Hollywood, racism wasn't a deal breaker. It was just part of the package. W.C. Fields was a pioneer, all right. He helped build early Hollywood comedy by stepping on everyone else to get the laugh. Spencer Tracy was the definition of golden age prestige. Two-time Oscar winner, 9 nominations, a long-standing on-screen partnership with Katharine Hepburn that Hollywood still romanticizes to this day. He played everything from working-class heroes to principled lawyers, a calm, steady figure in American film. But behind the reputation was a man who, by multiple accounts, held deeply racist views. On set, Tracy was known to casually drop the N-word. Crew members and fellow actors recalled his offhand slurs being delivered as jokes, but there was nothing light about them. He reportedly referred to black extras as "those people" and openly questioned why they even need speaking roles in certain films. And while some of his roles touched on progressive themes, like Guess Who's Coming to Dinner, Tracy himself wasn't known for championing inclusion. In fact, his longtime co-star and partner Katharine Hepburn once acknowledged that Spencer was very much a man of his time, and not in the flattering way. He also pushed back against hiring decisions involving non-white actors. According to casting records and internal studio memos, Tracy resisted working alongside black or Latino performers in anything resembling equal billing. He was polite in public, but resistant in private. And yet, like so many others on this list, his legacy was protected. Spencer Tracy is still remembered as one of the greats, a Hollywood gentleman, a powerhouse actor, and a moral compass in film. But the truth is, his compass only pointed north when the crew was white. Mickey Rooney was one of the most famous child stars in history, a box office king in the 1930s and 40s, and a lifelong performer with a career that stretched over 80 years. He played the boy next door, the all-American teen, and eventually the quirky elder statesman of Hollywood. But one role followed him all the way to his grave, and not in a good way. In 1961's Breakfast at Tiffany's, Mickey Rooney played Mr. Yunioshi, a Japanese character, in full yellow face, fake buck teeth, squinted eyes, cartoonish accent, every possible stereotype jammed into one performance, and it was meant to be funny. Audiences at the time may have laughed, but in the years since, the backlash has been relentless. Critics, Asian American groups, and even the film's director later admitted the role was offensive and regrettable, but not Mickey Rooney. He defended the performance for the rest of his life. Even when Asian actors publicly condemned it, even when Breakfast at Tiffany's screenings were protested, Rooney doubled down. He said, "It breaks my heart that people took offense. I wouldn't do anything to offend anyone. I played it as broad as I could because that was the style. But the truth is, that was the offense." He wasn't just playing a character. He was playing a racist fantasy of what Asian people looked and sounded like. And when the world asked him to reflect, he said they were too sensitive. Mickey Rooney made millions off a stereotype. And when called out, he didn't apologize. He just smiled and waited for the applause. Fred Astaire was elegance personified, a legend of dance, grace, and old Hollywood charm. He glided across the screen like magic, and to this day, his routines are studied, celebrated, and replayed as cinematic gold. But one of those famous routines? It was performed in blackface. In 1936's Swing Time, Astaire appeared in a musical number titled Bojangles of Harlem, a tribute supposedly to black tap legend Bill Bojangles Robinson. But instead of casting Robinson, or any black dancer, Astaire dressed up as him. He painted his face. He darkened his skin. He performed as a respectful homage, while still collecting the check. The number is often praised by old school critics as tasteful blackface, as if that's a real thing. But tribute or not, the message was clear. Hollywood could admire black talent, just not hire it. Astaire's version of honoring Bojangles was by impersonating him instead of sharing the stage with him. And this wasn't an isolated incident. According to biographers, Fred Astaire held deeply embedded racial biases off camera. He preferred to work with all-white casts, was uncomfortable with integrated scenes, and had little interest in changing the system that lifted him up while keeping others out. He was never openly aggressive. He didn't shout slurs or join hate groups, but he didn't have to. Astaire's racism was the quiet kind, the kind that smiles through a tux, puts on shoe polish, and dances like nothing's wrong. Hollywood called it class. But behind the charm was a man who danced on the very culture he refused to see as equal. Vivian Lee is best known for her legendary performance as Scarlett O'Hara in Gone with the Wind, a role that made her immortal in Hollywood history. She won 2 Academy Awards, was celebrated for her beauty and emotional depth, and to this day, she's considered one of the greatest actresses of all time. But the same film that made her a star also revealed the limits of her so-called grace. Gone with the Wind is one of the most racist blockbusters in history, a sweeping epic that glorifies the Confederacy, romanticizes slavery, and presents black characters as loyal, simple-minded servants. And while many cast members, including Hattie McDaniel, navigated that set with quiet resistance, Vivian Lee embraced the fantasy. According to her biographers, Lee made frequent derogatory comments about black people during filming. She reportedly told colleagues she didn't understand why people made such a fuss about the coloreds. She was also allegedly uncomfortable interacting with black extras on set, especially if they weren't in servant costumes. Her racism wasn't performative. It was casual, baked in, and quietly accepted. And yet she was showered with praise. Her performance as a Southern belle, dripping in nostalgia for a slave-owning society, was hailed as iconic. She was celebrated not in spite of the role, but because of it. And when civil rights leaders later criticized Gone with the Wind for whitewashing history, Lee stayed silent. No reflection, no regrets. Vivian Lee represented the ideal of Southern femininity on screen, but in real life, she held the same racial blind spots as the character she played. Scarlett O'Hara said she would never be hungry again, but maybe she was never starved or privileged to begin with. Leslie Howard is remembered for his soft-spoken charm, refined looks, and of course, for playing Ashley Wilkes in Gone with the Wind. In the eyes of Hollywood, he was a British gentleman, the thinking woman's heartthrob, and a symbol of nobility during Hollywood's golden age. But when you strip away the Southern drawl and plantation chic, you're left with something uglier. Howard didn't just star in Gone with the Wind, he believed in it. In interviews and letters, he defended the romanticized version of slavery shown in the film, calling it a beautiful portrayal of a simpler, more civilized time. He described the Confederacy as tragic but noble, and insisted that the Negro characters are shown with great dignity. Let's be clear, this wasn't a man quietly doing his job. This was someone who helped frame a white supremacist fantasy as history. Off camera, he doubled down. He wrote that black people lacked the refinement for complex society, and described them as grateful for order in the Old South. Howard even clashed with studio members who wanted to tone down the racism in the script. He thought they were ruining the story. And while history often paints him as a tragic war hero, he died in a mysterious plane crash during World War II. His legacy as a performer is forever tied to the preservation of a lie. Leslie Howard didn't just wear the uniform, he carried the flag. They called it the golden age of Hollywood, but now you've seen what was buried underneath the gold. These weren't just men of their time. These were actors, producers, and cultural icons who helped build an industry on racism, profited from it, and got applauded for it. Blackface wasn't a mistake. It was the main act. Segregation wasn't behind the scenes. It was in the scripts, the casting calls, the contracts. And when they said timeless, they didn't mean everyone's time. They meant white. Statues were built. Airports were named. The Academy gave them awards, and history handed them legacy. But legacy without accountability? That's just a prettier lie. So next time someone says, don't judge the past by today's standards, just remember, they knew what they were doing. They just didn't think we'd ever call it out. Like, comment, share, Because history doesn't clean itself up. We do. And if you thought this was bad, wait till you see our video on the stars who actually tried to fight the system and paid the price for it. It's coming.